You know, I was made in China, born in Shanghai. My name is Sam Hamilton, Samuel Weir Hamilton III, and I'm originally from Shanghai, China. That's why I could say I was made in China. My dad worked for National City Bank of New York. He got to Shanghai in 1927, that is. Dad would, every 4 years, Dad would get a chance to get away from the bank and come back to the States. The Japanese had gotten into China pretty severely, and it wasn't looking very good for foreign nationals. So Dad had spent his 4 years in that area, so we had a 6-month leave anyway. Dad was reassigned to Manila, Philippine Islands. We got out there in February of 1941. I guess the timing wasn't too good, because we all know what happened December 7th. The same thing happened December 8th in the Philippines.
Hello, NBC. This is Bert Simon speaking from Manila, and this time I've got a real scoop for you. Manila has just been bombed. In fact, right now it is being bombed, and without warning.
I was in class, as a matter of fact, the day they bombed Manila. I was going to the American school was the name of the school, and I was in the 5th grade. I remember that. Our government didn't want the civilians to leave, even though they had sent their own wives and dependents back to the States with this impending situation. But because they didn't want the natives to feel as though they were being left behind or being exposed to, so they kept the bulk of us right there in Manila. When Manila was bombed, my dad and other people in National City Bank took their families out into the country. The Japanese fighter planes would come and strafe even out in that part of the world. So it wasn't any safer to be there. So we moved back into Manila. One particular day, one of their soldiers with a rifle and a bayonet and so forth pops over this wall of the property that we're staying at, and he had an officer with him and an interpreter, and they took us all to Rizal Stadium, which is a very famous stadium, and then they took us by truckload to Santo Tomas. January 6th of 1942, the Japs picked up as many Allied civilians as possible. There were upwards almost 4,000 of us interned in Santo Tomas and gutted all the classrooms, and that's where they put men and older boys with their fathers, the wives and girls, and also boys up until about the age of, I think it might have been 9 or 10. And if they got older, then they got in the room with their dad. All different nationalities: Canadians, Brits, Aussies, New Zealanders, Dutch, French. What they did is they had maybe about 4 or 5 different shanty areas, and they were named different names. Glamourville was the name, is where we lived, which was right off of the main field. We were told, bring food and clothing for 3 days. 3 days, it turned into 3 years. The worst part of the whole internment, of course, was the starvation diet. At the end, in January, before we were liberated in February, our caloric intake was no more than a piece of bread a day. Things got difficult enough that the kids actually, some kids even went to the garbage areas to find food. This other friend of mine and I did get into a barrel that had Japanese soya mash, I guess is what it was. But if we'd ever been caught, we'd have really had a problem. we happened to know about this particular barrel of stuff, and we took some. The word got out that the Japanese were going to kill all prisoners of war, including the civilians. And that word got to MacArthur when he first landed in the northern part. Lingayen Gulf is where they landed. He organized this flying column. It took them 3 days to get to us. The night of around 9 o'clock, after flares going up and lots of gunfire and pretty spectacular noises and so forth, we didn't know it at the time that it was our troops.
Santo Tomas University, Jap prison camp, opens its gates to 3,700 internees. Hard-driving American forces sweeping the enemy from Manila free men, women, and children held prisoners during the 3 years of Jap occupation.
When the tanks rolled in, Dad was curious enough so that he wanted to go across to the plaza in front of the main building, and I kind of followed him. The guy that was in charge of the guard, a Colonel Abiko, comes across, and he's got a samurai sword, and he's got on his hip, and he's reaching in his tunic for a grenade, and this one particular officer who has trained his men to shoot the carbine from the hip, he sees this happening, and he plugs it Abiko, and Abiko goes down. And of course, because of Abiko's strict demeanor, he's hated by the internees, and they proceed to kick him and so forth. One very interesting part of our internment was when our planes came in and bombed Manila, bombed the port area and also the airfields and other military establishments. And it was a sight to behold. And these were carrier-based planes. And I guess that's one of the reasons why when the draft came along for the Korean conflict, Korean police action, some people called it, but it was a conflict. And I signed up for Air Force and also Naval Air. And Naval Air came to me first. And in July of 1952, I was in Pensacola going through training. See, I never did graduate. I never did get my wings and commission because about a month and a half after or before we were transferred to Corpus Christi for all-weather flight, they had changed the syllabus, and they put us into twin-engine Beechcraft for flying under the hood. And it was at the end of the Korean conflict that I washed out, so to speak, because they were cutting appropriations. I decided I was going to go back and finish up school, and that's what I did. Actually, I went back to the Philippines as a reunion with a group of us in '95. One of the bus trips we made was to the main campus of Santo Tomas. So we were able to actually get into the building, and I remember going right back up to where our room was, as a matter of fact. It was on the second floor, and room 26. I think there were some tears shed, and a good deal of swallowing and so forth.